Imagine you're walking through a seafood market. Ice everywhere. Fish neatly arranged. Shellfish stacked in baskets. Everything looks normal until you notice something strange. Some of the clams are slightly open, and inside, the flesh isn't pale or beige. It's red. Deep red. They're called blood clams. And the moment you see them, a question forms almost automatically. Why does a clam look like that? Because clams aren't supposed to look like they're bleeding. Yet, in some countries, blood clams are considered a delicacy. In others, they're tightly regulated. And in a few places, they're banned outright. So what makes this one small shellfish so controversial? And why have blood clams been linked, again and again, to serious disease outbreaks? If you enjoy uncovering the hidden stories behind ordinary things, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Because today, we're uncovering why blood clams have earned a reputation as one of the most dangerous clams in the world. Here's the first thing most people don't know. Blood clams are different from almost every other clam you've seen. Most clams don't have red blood. They don't need it. They absorb oxygen directly from the water in small amounts, just enough to survive. Blood clams are different. They contain hemoglobin, the same oxygen-carrying molecule found in human blood. That hemoglobin is what gives their flesh its dark red color, and it allows blood clams to survive in places other shellfish can't. Loxygen mud, thick sediment, coastal waters filled with organic waste. From an evolutionary standpoint, this is a huge advantage. While other clams suffocate, blood clams keep going. But this adaptation comes with a hidden cost. Because blood clams are filter feeders. To survive, they constantly pull water through their bodies, extracting food particles. But they don't just filter nutrients. They filter everything in that water. Bacteria, viruses, parasites, and blood clams don't clear these pathogens efficiently. Instead, they accumulate them. This is where most people get confused. They assume that if a food looks dangerous, it must be poisonous. Blood clams aren't poisonous. They don't produce toxins. They don't sting. They don't attack. The danger comes from what they carry. Blood clams often live in coastal areas close to human activity, places where untreated or partially treated sewage can enter the water. When that happens, pathogens don't disappear. They concentrate inside organisms like blood clams. In the past, blood clams have been linked to outbreaks of hepatitis A, hepatitis E, typhoid fever, and dysentery, not because the clams were bad, but because they were harvested from polluted waters. And here's the part that makes the risk much worse. In many traditional dishes, blood clams are eaten lightly cooked, sometimes just briefly boiled, sometimes barely heated at all. That's often not enough to kill the pathogens inside them. During the 1980s and 1990s, several major disease outbreaks in parts of Asia were traced back to blood clams harvested from sewage-contaminated coastal zones. In some cases, thousands of people became ill. Suddenly, this obscure shellfish became a public health concern. Governments responded in different ways. Some regions imposed strict harvesting controls, others required thorough cooking, and some banned blood clams altogether. But blood clams didn't disappear, because they're resilient, they're cheap to farm, and they're deeply embedded in culinary tradition. And that creates a strange contradiction. In clean, carefully monitored waters, blood clams can be relatively safe. In polluted waters, they can become biological sponges for disease. And that leads to a deeper realization. Blood clams aren't dangerous by nature. They're dangerous by context. And that's where the story really starts to get interesting. This is where blood clams reveal something deeper about how danger really works. Because the clam itself isn't aggressive. It doesn't hunt. It doesn't poison. It simply survives. Blood clams are remarkably tolerant of environments that would kill most shellfish. Low oxygen doesn't stop them. Dirty sediment doesn't stop them. In fact, those conditions often help them. When coastal waters become polluted, many species disappear. Blood clams don't. They thrive. And that makes them cheap and easy to harvest. Which is exactly why they became popular in regions where clean coastal water was becoming harder to find. Here's what surprises most people. Blood clams don't create disease, they concentrate it. They act like biological storage units for whatever pathogens exist in their environment. If the water is clean, blood clams remain relatively harmless. If the water is contaminated, they quietly collect that contamination. This is why scientists often use blood clams as environmental indicators. By testing them, researchers can learn what's happening in coastal ecosystems. They reveal pollution levels that aren't always obvious in the water itself. In other words, blood clams don't lie. And this is also why regulating them is so difficult. Unlike toxins that come from the animal itself, pathogens depend entirely on where and how the clam was grown. One harvest site can be safe. Another, just a few kilometers away, can be dangerous. This makes blanket rules hard to enforce. That's why some governments banned blood clams outright, while others focused on strict monitoring and mandatory cooking standards. But even cooking isn't always a perfect solution. Some pathogens can survive brief boiling. Others require sustained high temperatures to fully deactivate. And traditional preparation methods don't always meet those standards. This creates a gap between cultural practice and modern food safety. From a biological perspective, blood clams are a success story. They evolved a clever solution to oxygen survival. From a public health perspective, they're a warning sign. They expose the cost of polluted waterways and shortcuts in food handling. And this leads to the most important takeaway of all. Blood clams are not uniquely dangerous. They're uniquely honest. They show us that danger in food doesn't always come from exotic toxins or dramatic poisons. Sometimes, it comes from normal organisms placed in unhealthy environments. The clam doesn't change. The water does. So when people ask whether blood clams are the most dangerous clams, the real answer is more nuanced. They're dangerous when we make them dangerous. They sit at the intersection of biology, pollution, and human behavior. A small shellfish quietly reflecting the state of our environment back to us. And that's why blood clams continue to be controversial. Not because they're mysterious, but because they force us to confront something uncomfortable. The safety of what we eat depends on the health of where it comes from. So the next time you hear about blood clams, remember this. The real risk isn't hidden inside the shell, it's in the water surrounding it. If this changed the way you think about seafood, leave a like, subscribe, and share it with someone who enjoys learning how simple things hide complex truths. Because sometimes, the most dangerous foods aren't dangerous on their own. They're dangerous because they tell the truth.